Here are kids who became heroes. So a 10-year-old named Tilly Smith is credited with saving over 100 people while on vacation in Thailand when she noticed the sea bubbling and the tide receding rapidly, recalling her school lessons on tsunamis just a few weeks prior, and warned everybody to evacuate. Also saving multiple lives was an 11-year-old named Davon Johnson who performed the Heimlich on a classmate and saved a woman from a house fire on the same day. In 2017, an 8-year-old boy named JT who weighed just 48 pounds lifted a 2,000-pound car off his dad who got pinned under the car when the jack slipped, thanks to an insane amount of adrenaline, I guess. In 2024, a 12-year-old named Brock Lewis drove a manual transmission pickup truck loaded up with his dogs through a massive fire that broke out, saving himself and all the family animals. Also in 2024 was a 10-year-old named Mateo who disobediently stayed up past his bedtime to game, but ended up detecting a carbon monoxide leak from the basement beeper that ended up saving his entire family. And finally, a 5-year-old named Savannah knew to call 911 after she noticed her dad had a heavy shortness of breath, which ultimately saved him from his cardiac arrest. That's crazy. These are kids with world records. So Michael Kearney is the youngest person to ever graduate college at 10 years old from the University of South Alabama after starting college at age 8. While Tatum O'Neal was the youngest Oscar winner ever at just 10 years old for her role in Paper Moon in 1974. Mac Rutherford was 17 years old when he became the youngest solo pilot to circumnavigate the entire globe after embarking on a 5-month journey. And the youngest billionaire is Kevin David Lehman after he inherited a 50% stake in the German drugstore chain DM at age 18. Victor D. Leon III, also known as Lil Poison, is the youngest professional gamer ever and became pro in Halo at age 6 when he signed with MLG. While Gu Corey was 12 years old when he not only won a gold medal, but also became the first person to ever land a 1080-degree turn on a vertical ramp in competition, surpassing Tony Hawk. Tucker Rosen was the youngest person to ever undergo open heart surgery, being just 24 weeks old as a fetus. He miraculously survived. And finally, Parv Thakur was the youngest person to ever release an album at just 1 year old. I listened and it's honestly not too bad. These are the most delusional people in history. So King Charles VI of France was convinced that he was made of glass and had iron rods sewn into his clothing to prevent himself from breaking. Similarly, Princess Alexandra Amalia of Bavaria famously walked sideways through doorways because she believed she swallowed a grand piano when she was a child. Hong Zhujuan was a Chinese man who was convinced that he was the brother of Jesus Christ, and as a result, he started an uprising called the Taiping Rebellion to cleanse China, which unfortunately led to a civil war that resulted in 30 million deaths, making one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Perhaps more deluded than this, though, was Louis XIV, who called himself the Sun King, as he actually thought he was the literal center of the solar system. He wasn't. Joshua Norton was a San Francisco man who, in the 1800s, was convinced that he was the Emperor of the United States, and cities actually played along with his delusion, giving him free meals, special currency to shop, and he even had 30,000 people attend his funeral. And finally, Qin Shi Huang was a Chinese emperor who thought that he was working towards immortality and would regularly drink mercury to reach eternal life, but it ended up poisoning him and then killing him. Pretty cool, right? Here's the most optimal daily routine. So 7 a.m. is considered the ideal wake-up time to get sunlight in without the risk of sunburn. You also set up your melatonin production for 16 hours later at night. Around 7:30 a.m. and you should begin to hydrate, and at 8 a.m. you should do low-intensity movement like a walk to signal to your brain that the day has begun. 9 a.m. is when you should have your first meal, focusing on proteins and healthy fats, and if you're a coffee drinker, 2 hours after wake-up is considered ideal for your first dosage. 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. should be for any deep cognitive work as it's considered peak focus, and afterwards at 1 p.m. you should have a protein-rich lunch to avoid an afternoon slump. At 2 p.m. you should get more sunlight to trigger productivity and then continue working on until 4:30 p.m. 5 p.m. is considered the optimal exercise window because grip strength and reaction time is maximized here. 6 p.m. is optimal dinner time, and for this you can have a fairly balanced meal with less restriction. You can ease down at this point and spend the next 3 hours just relaxing into the night. 10 p.m. is ideal for your warm shower to trigger a body temperature drop, which helps prepare for sleep. And then ideal bedtime is at 11 p.m. where you should aim for a dark, cool room with no screens to optimize for a complete 8-hour rest. Is this your routine? These are the most powerful kids in the world. So Kim Jong-un's 13-year-old daughter named Kim Ju-ae is officially set to be his successor to rule North Korea, making her the only Gen Alpha figure with impending access to nukes. 14-year-old Princess Estelle of Sweden is also being groomed as the future queen of her country, attending state dinners and major events, while 11-year-old Prince Jock of Monaco is doing something similar. In terms of media influence, Blue Ivy Carter will have the deepest music and Hollywood ties thanks to her parents, and in terms of pure following, Kids Diana Show has the largest reach of any child in the world. 13-year-old Prince George of Wales is moving into his apprenticeship phase of his life as future king, while his sister Princess Charlotte is next in line for power after him, but is technically richer than him and actually the richest kid in the entire world, with a net worth of $5 billion thanks to her royal inheritance. Though technically the richest and most influential kid will likely end up being Elon Musk's son, Little Musk, who has the potential to inherit over $1 trillion one day, and major stakes in a handful of companies, as well as potential of being a sovereign of Mars should SpaceX ban out accordingly. Pretty cool, right? These are the most realistic movies according to experts. So the most realistic war movie is Saving Private Ryan, particularly because the opening D-Day sequence that triggered actual PTSD in World War II veterans. Das Boot comes second for capturing the psychological toll of war. The most realistic depiction of dinosaurs was actually Jurassic Park at the time of its release. But nowadays the series Prehistoric Planet is the gold standard for dinosaur realism, aligning with the latest evidence. According to lawyers, My Cousin Vinny is the most accurate legal drama, with being actually used in law schools to teach trial advocacy. The Pit is held by medical experts as being the most realistic and medically accurate, plus capturing the emergency-themed environment for movies that would be Contagion, which actually depicts a pandemic. According to NASA, Apollo 13 is effectively considered a documentary because of the attention to detail in the spacecraft and the jargon used by the controllers. Otherwise, The Martian is the best for a more modern depiction. And finally, many finance workers agree that Industry is the best for depicting the banking culture and realism that happens on the trading floor. Otherwise, that would be the movie Margin Call. Pretty cool, right? Here are the most successful celebrity companies. So Scams Kim Kardashian Shapewear Company is the largest celebrity-owned company in the world, valued at over $5 billion, is actually one of the fastest-growing apparel companies, period. Rihanna has $2 billion businesses, with Fenty Beauty valued at $3 billion and Savage X Fenty Lingerie at $1 billion, making her the only celebrity with multiple billion-dollar businesses. Other billion-dollar beauty companies include Rare Beauty by Selena Gomez, which is worth $2 billion, Kylie Cosmetics by Kylie Jenner, that's $1.2 billion, and Rhode Skin by Hailey Bieber, that's actually just sold recently for $1 billion. Other celebrity companies that were sold for large sums is Beats by Dr. Dre, which was sold to Apple for $3 billion, Casamigos by George Clooney were sold for $1 billion, and Mint Mobile, which is partially owned by Ryan Reynolds, it sold for $1.4 billion. Terramana Tequila is apparently worth $3.5 billion, meaning that The Rock, who is the owner, is already likely a billionaire. But technically, the most successful trajectory of any celebrity-owned business actually belongs to Feastables by Mr. Beast, which is already valued at $3 billion and projected to aggressively grow further in the coming years. Good job, Mr. Beast. These are movie scenes that were entirely improvised. So in The Dark Knight, the scene where Joker is walking away from the hospital while it explodes behind him is entirely improvised thanks to a pyrotechnic glitch that delayed the explosion, meaning that Heath Ledger was genuinely surprised and played it off naturally. In Django Unchained, Leonardo DiCaprio accidentally smashed a glass in this scene and started bleeding, but he stayed in character and smeared the blood on Kerry Washington, making one of the most memorable scenes in the movie. In Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark, this scene was supposed to depict a scripted sword fight, but unfortunately Harrison Ford got food poisoning and couldn't perform, so they instead just had him shoot him as a gag and kept it in. In Midnight Cowboy, Dustin Hoffman was actually almost hit by a taxi that drove onto set, but he instead stuck with it and delivered his iconic "I'm walking here" line. In The Lord of the Rings The Two Towers, Viggo Mortensen kicks a helmet in frustration and ends up breaking 2 toes, and instead of stopping the scene, channels the pain to let out a scream of grief, which ended up being a key part of the movie. And finally, in Blade Runner, Roy Batty wanted to make his death more poetic, so he decided to take a white dove and release it right after his death, which ended up being one of the best shots in film history. Pretty cool, right? These are movies that were made by YouTubers. So Talk to Me is a horror film made by Australian YouTubers Raka Raka that grossed over $92 million on a $4 million budget, making it A24's most successful horror film to date. It actually made a second film last year called Bring Her Back, which also had strong reviews and grossed over $40 million. Shelby Oaks is a horror film made by film critic YouTuber Chris Stuckman in 2025. It was actually crowdfunded and raised $1.4 million from fans that funded the movie, which led to mixed reviews and $7 million made. Markiplier made the horror movie Iron Lung, which is based off the video game of the same name. It's actually made over $60 million and is technically the highest ROI video game movie of all time. 10 Cloverfield Lane, another horror movie, was made by Dan Trachtenberg, who co-hosts of the YouTube series Totally Rad Show. He's gone on to direct Predator, Badlands, and even the pilot episode of The Boys. Bo Burnham made the comedy movie 8th Grade, which actually holds a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes and made over $14 million at the box office. And finally, David Sandberg originally posted his short films on YouTube, which, thanks to some early virality, ultimately launched his career, and he went on to make Lights Out, Shazam, and Until Dawn. You love to see it. These are movies that were deleted. So Star Wars A New Hope is apparently so bad that all of George Lucas's friends said it would be a career-ending flop. He almost deleted the entire movie, but instead decided to entirely rework it, and it led to the start of the franchise. A director named Richard Williams spent 28 years hand-animating what was going to be one of the greatest animated films ever made, but after he went over budget, the studio decided to fire him, and they tore up the entire film. A 9-hour movie was shot called Greed and was sold to MGM for distribution, but MGM decided they wanted to release a condensed 2-hour version of the movie, so to ensure the director couldn't have any more say, they boiled the rest of the film, meaning that nearly 80% of the film is completely gone in history. This actually happened to Metropolis as well in the 1920s, but in 2008, a tiny museum in Argentina realized that they had a 16mm print lying around for decades, so they unearthed it and saved the legacy of the film. And finally, Toy Story 2 was literally almost deleted after a Pixar employee ran a cleanup command on a computer which completely erased the project. But luckily, an employee named Galen Suzman was working from home on maternity leave, and she had a backup copy on a USB stick that literally saved the entire movie and franchise, so shout out to Galen.